She was the last of her kind, and begged the human to help save her species. The desperate encounter. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of Sector 7's abandoned warehouse district. Jake Morrison pulled his jacket tighter as he navigated. The flooded streets, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs of the upper city. He wasn't supposed to be here after curfew, but the black market deal couldn't wait. His sister needed the medicine, and legal channels had failed him again. The sound of breaking glass made him freeze. Through the downpour, he saw a figure stumble from between two derelict buildings. At first, Jake thought it was another scavenger or street dweller, but as the figure moved closer to a flickering streetlight, his breath caught in his throat. She was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin held a subtle luminescence, like moonlight on water, and her hair cascaded in waves. That seemed to shift between silver and deep blue. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, large and filled with a desperation that transcended species. She wore what looked like the remnants of some kind of uniform, torn and stained with substances he couldn't identify. "Please," she whispered, her voice carrying an accent that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I need help. They're coming for me." Jake's first instinct was to run. Getting involved with aliens meant trouble with the colonial authority, and he already had enough problems. But something in her voice, the way she clutched at her abdomen as if protecting something precious, made him pause. "Who's coming for?" "You?" he asked, glancing around the empty street. "The harvesters," she replied, stumbling closer. "They took my people, all of them. I'm the last of the Zephyrians. They want what's inside me." Before Jake could respond, the distant hum of hover vehicles echoed through the rain. The woman's eyes widened in terror, and she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "They'll kill me and take my child," she gasped. "Please, human, I've heard your species has compassion. I have nowhere else to turn." The vehicles were getting closer, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the nearest alley. "This way," he said, leading her through a maze of abandoned buildings he knew from his youth. The woman, who introduced herself as Zara, struggled to keep up, her condition becoming more apparent with each step. They found shelter in an old subway tunnel, one of the few places the authority rarely patrolled. Jake watched as Zara settled against the wall, her breathing labored. In the dim light from his flashlight, he could see the subtle glow emanating from her skin was more pronounced around her midsection. "How long have you been hiding?" he asked. "3 days," she replied, her voice weak. "Since they destroyed our settlement ship. We thought we were safe in the outer systems, but they found us anyway." Jake had heard whispers about the Harvesters, a ruthless organization that traded in genetic, material, and rare biological specimens. The thought of them hunting down an entire species made his stomach turn. "What makes you so special to them?" he asked gently. Zara's hand moved protectively to her belly. "My people, we reproduce differently than most species. Our children carry the genetic memory of our entire race. Each birth preserves our history, our knowledge, our culture. The harvesters want to harvest this memory, to sell it to the highest bidder." The weight of her words settled over Jake like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying the future of her entire species. "If they catch me," Zara continued, "the Zephyrians will be truly extinct. Everything we were, everything we could become, will be lost forever." Jake stared at her, understanding the magnitude of what she was asking. Helping her meant going against one of the most dangerous organizations in the galaxy. It meant risking everything he had left, but as he looked into her eyes, filled with hope and desperation, he realized he couldn't walk away. His sister had taught him that sometimes doing the right thing meant taking impossible risks. "Okay," he said quietly. I'll help you. Dawn broke gray and cold over the industrial district as Jake led Zara through the maintenance tunnels beneath. The city, his mind raced with half-formed plans, trying to figure out how to keep her safe while the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy searched for her. "We need to get you off-world," he said, checking his watch. "I know someone who might help, but we'll have to cross the market district." Zara nodded, though Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She'd been running for days, and her condition was worsening. The glow around her midsection had intensified, and she moved with the careful precision of someone in pain. They emerged from the tunnels near the old spaceport, where independent traders and smugglers operated with minimal authority. Oversight. Jake scanned the area, looking for any sign of the harvester's distinctive black vehicles. "There," he pointed to a small freighter being loaded with cargo. "Captain Torres owes me a favor. She might take us to the outer rim." But as they approached the ship, Jake's blood ran cold. 3 figures in dark uniforms stood near the loading ramp, their faces hidden behind reflective masks. Harvesters. "They're already here," Zara whispered, gripping Jake's arm. One of the figures turned in their direction, and Jake could see the red glow of scanning equipment built into the mask. They'd been spotted. "Run," Jake said, pulling Zara back toward the tunnel entrance. The chase that followed was a nightmare of twisting alleys and industrial machinery. Jake's knowledge of the district's layout was the only thing keeping them ahead of their pursuers, but he could hear the heavy footsteps gaining ground. They ducked into a factory complex, weaving between massive conveyor belts and processing equipment. The noise provided cover, but Jake knew they couldn't hide forever. He needed a plan. "In here," he said, leading Zara into a maintenance closet. The space was barely large enough for both of them, and Jake found himself pressed close to her as they listened to the harvesters searching the factory floor. "Why are you doing this?" Zara asked quietly. "You don't even know me." Jake thought about his sister, lying in a hospital bed because he couldn't afford proper treatment. He thought about all the times the system had failed people like him, people who didn't matter to those in power. "Because it's right," he said simply. "Because someone has to." A sound of footsteps moved away, and Jake carefully opened the door. The factory floor was empty, but he knew their pursuers were still out there. "We need weapons," he said, "and we need help." Zara looked at him with something that might have been admiration. "Your species truly is remarkable. Even faced with impossible odds, you choose to fight." Jake smiled grimly. "We're stubborn that way." He led her to another section of the factory, where he knew the workers kept emergency supplies. The lockbox was exactly where he remembered it, containing flares, emergency beacons, and most importantly, 2 industrial cutting tools that could serve as makeshift weapons. "Can you use one of these?" he asked, handing her a plasma cutter. Zara examined the tool with the careful attention of someone who understood technology. "My people were engineers and scholars, but we learned to defend ourselves when necessary." A sound from the factory entrance made them both freeze. The harvesters had found them again. "This way," Jake whispered, leading her toward the back of the facility. But as they reached the rear exit, Jake's heart sank. More harvesters waited outside, their weapons trained on the doorway. They were trapped. "There's another way," Zara said suddenly. "The ventilation system. My people are smaller than humans, but you might fit." Jake looked up at the maintenance grate above them. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was their only option. "You first," he said, boosting her up toward the opening as Zara disappeared into the ductwork. Jake heard the harvesters entering the factory. He grabbed the emergency beacon from the supply box and activated it, hoping someone friendly would receive the signal. Then he climbed into the vent after Zara, pulling the grate closed just as the firster reached their position. In the darkness of the ventilation system, Jake could hear Zara's labored breathing ahead of him. They crawled through the narrow space, following the ductwork toward an uncertain destination. "Jake," Zara whispered, her voice strained. "Something's wrong. The baby ... it's coming." Jake's blood turned to ice. They were trapped in a ventilation shaft, being hunted by killers, and Zara was going into labor. "Hold on," he said, though he had no idea how they were going to survive this. Behind them, he could hear the harvesters discovering their escape route. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the ductwork as their pursuers began following them. Jake realized they had minutes, maybe less, before they were caught. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, the last hope for an entire species was about to be born. The ventilation shaft led to an abandoned office building, its windows broken and floors covered in dust. Jake helped Zara down from the ductwork, her condition clearly deteriorating. The luminescent patterns on her skin pulsed with increasing intensity, and her breathing had become sharp and irregular. "We need to find somewhere safe," Jake said, supporting her weight as they moved through the empty corridors. "There's no time," Zara gasped, doubling over as another contraction hit her. "The child comes now." Jake's mind raced. He had no medical training, no supplies, and no idea how Zephyrian biology worked. But looking at Zara's face, twisted with pain and determination, he knew he had to try. He found a relatively clean office space on the third floor, with a couch that would have to serve as a delivery bed. Jake barricaded the door with furniture, while Zara settled herself as comfortably as possible. "What do I need to know?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the terror he felt. "Zephyrian births are different," Zara explained between gasps. "The child will be born in a protective membrane like a cocoon. You must not break it until the membrane begins to glow." "How will I know when that happens?" "You'll know," she said, gripping his hand as another contraction began. "The light will be brilliant, like a star being born." Through the broken windows, Jake could hear the sound of vehicles surrounding the building. The harvesters had found them again, but for now, they were focused on the birth happening before them. Zara's transformation was incredible to witness. Her skin began to emit a soft, rhythmic glow that pulsed in time with her breathing. Her hair, which had appeared silver before, now showed streaks of deep blue and gold. She was beautiful and terrifying, alien and utterly human in her struggle. "Tell me about your people," Jake said, hoping to keep her focused. "What were they like?" Despite her pain, Zara smiled. "We were dreamers and builders. We created cities that floated in the clouds of gas giants, powered by the winds themselves. We wrote poetry and mathematics and sang symphonies with the frequencies of distant stars." Jake found himself imagining these wonders, cultures, and achievements that might die with the woman beside him. "My daughter will carry all of this," Zara continued. "Every song, every story, every discovery. She be the living memory of our race." "Daughter?" Jake had assumed, but hearing it confirmed made it more real. "Yes, her name will be Lyra, like the constellation where our people first learned to speak with light." The sound of forced entry echoed from the lower floors. The harvesters had breached the building. "They're coming," Jake said, checking his improvised weapon. "It doesn't matter," Zara said, her voice growing stronger despite her condition. "She's almost here. Can you see the light?" Jake looked and gasped. Zara's entire body was glowing now, but it was nothing compared to the brilliant radiance emanating from her midsection. It was like watching the birth of a small sun. "Now," Zara said urgently, "it's time." What followed was the most incredible experience of Jake's life. The membrane that emerged was translucent and shimmering, containing a tiny form that pulsed with its own inner light. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful or fragile. "Wait," Zara whispered, exhausted but alert, The membrane must mature. They waited, listening to the sounds of the harvesters searching the floors below. The membrane around the child grew brighter, and Jake could see tiny features becoming more distinct. The baby was perfect, with her mother's luminescent skin and delicate features. "Now," Zara said, and Jake carefully opened the membrane. The moment Lyra took her first breath, the entire room filled with light. Not just the gentle glow of Zephyrian biology, but something deeper and more profound. Jake felt knowledge flowing. Through him, images and sensations that weren't his own. He saw the great floating cities Zara had described, heard the mathematical poetry of her people, felt the weight of their accumulated wisdom. "She's sharing the memories," Zara explained weakly. "That's how we preserve our culture. Through touch. Through connection." Jake looked down at the tiny being in his arms and felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This child wasn't just Zara's daughter. She was the future of an entire species. Heavy footsteps reached their floor. The harvesters had found them. "Take her," Zara said, struggling to sit up. "There's an emergency beacon in my uniform. Activate it. There are others out there, other races who oppose the harvesters. They'll help you." "I'm not leaving you," Jake said firmly. "You have to," Zara replied, her eyes filled with tears. "She needs to live. My people need to live. That's more important than any of us." The door exploded inward, and 3 harvesters entered with weapons drawn. Their leader, a tall figure with cybernetic implants replacing most of his face, stepped forward. "The specimen will come with us," he said in a voice like grinding metal. "The human can leave." "No," Jake said, holding Lyra closer. "She's not a specimen. She's a person." The harvester's remaining eye fixed on him with cold calculation. "Your species' sentiment is noted and dismissed. We have a contract to fulfill." Jake looked at Zara, who gave him a weak but determined nod. He understood. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. "Over my dead body," Jake said, raising his weapon. The harvester almost seemed to smile. "If necessary." The first plasma bolt seared past Jake's head, burning a hole in the wall behind him. He dove behind the desk, clutching Lyra protectively, while return fire filled the air with deadly light. The baby remained impossibly calm, her tiny eyes reflecting the chaotic battle around them with an intelligence that seemed far beyond her minutes of life. "Surrender the specimen," the lead harvester called out, his mechanical voice echoing through the smoke-filled room. "You cannot win this fight, human." Jake glanced at Zara, who had managed to crawl behind the couch despite her weakened condition. She held up a small device, her fingers working frantically over its controls. "The beacon," she whispered. "I'm trying to boost the signal." Another volley of plasma fire forced Jake to keep his head down. He could hear the harvesters spreading out, trying to flank their position. They were professional soldiers, and he was just a scavenger with a stolen weapon. The odds were impossible, but as he looked down at Lyra, still glowing softly in his arms, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. This tiny being represented the future of an entire species. She was worth fighting for, worth dying for. "Jake," Zara called out softly, "touch her forehead. Let her share with you." "Now's not the time for—" "Trust me," Zara insisted. Jake carefully placed his palm against Lyra's luminescent skin, and the world exploded into light and knowledge. He saw the harvester's ship layouts, their tactical formations, their weaknesses. The information came from Zara's memories, intelligence gathered during her captivity. More importantly, he felt the weight of Zephyrian culture flowing through him. Their peaceful philosophy, their belief in the inherent value of all life, their dedication to preserving knowledge and beauty in the universe. He understood now why they were worth saving. "The emergency stairs," he said, the knowledge coming from somewhere deep in his mind. There's a structural weakness in the building's eastern support column. If we could— I know what you're thinking, Zara said, her voice growing stronger. But you can't bring down the building. There are innocent people in the surrounding area. Jake gritted his teeth. Even in the face of extinction, the Zephyrians couldn't abandon their principles. It was admirable and frustrating at the same time. The harvesters were closing in, their movements coordinated and precise. Jake could hear them communicating through their helmet systems, planning their final assault. Then, from somewhere far above, came a sound that made everyone freeze. The whine of descending aircraft. "Response team," the lead harvester snarled. Someone answered the beacon. Through the broken windows, Jake could see sleek ships descending from the clouds. But these weren't harvester vessels. They were something else entirely. The ships were organic-looking, with flowing curves and patterns that reminded him of living things. "The Preservation Alliance," Zara breathed, hope filling her voice. "They're here." The newcomers wasted no time. Jake heard the distinctive crack of energy weapons, followed by the harvesters' return fire. The building shook as the battle moved outside, but Jake knew their immediate problems weren't solved. "We need to move while they're distracted," he sighed, cradling Lyra as he helped Zara to her feet. They made their way to the emergency stairs, moving as quickly as Zara's condition allowed. Behind them, Jake could hear the remaining harvesters coordinating their withdrawal, their mission compromised. By the arrival of the Alliance ships, on the ground floor, they encountered a scene of controlled chaos. Alliance soldiers, their armor seemingly grown rather than manufactured, were securing the area. One of them approached, removing her helmet to reveal features that were distinctly non-human, but undeniably kind. "I am Commander Vess of the Preservation Alliance," she said, her voice carrying harmonic undertones. "We received your beacon. Is the child safe?" "She's safe," Jake said, though he made no move to hand Lyra over. "But how do we know you're not just another group of collectors?" Vess smiled, and Jake saw understanding in her eyes. "Because we're here to preserve, not to exploit. The Alliance exists to protect endangered species and cultures. We've been tracking the harvesters for months, trying to save what remains of the Zephyrians." "There are others?" Zara asked, her voice filled with desperate hope. "3 survivors that we know of," Vess replied. "All males, all safe in Alliance custody. With your daughter, there's hope for your species' future." Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Lyra wouldn't be alone in the universe. She would have others of her kind, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. "We need to get you to medical facilities," Vess continued, gesturing toward one of the Alliance ships. "Both of you. A child's birth was traumatic, and you've both been through significant stress." As they walked toward the ship, Jake found himself reluctant to let go of Lyra. In the short time since her birth, he'd come to feel protective of her in a way that surprised him. "She be safe with us," Vess assured him, noticing his hesitation. "The Alliance has extensive experience with endangered species rehabilitation." "It's not just about safety," Jake said, looking down at the baby's glowing face. "She's special. She carries the memory of her entire people, which is why she needs to be with others who can understand that burden," Vess replied gently. "But that doesn't mean you have to disappear from her life. The Alliance always has need for people who understand the value of what we're trying to preserve." Jake looked at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. "You saved us both," she said. "You gave my daughter a chance at life, gave my people a chance at survival. That makes you part of our family, if you'll have us." As they boarded the Alliance ship, Jake realized his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a scavenger, struggling to survive. He was part of something bigger, something that mattered. Looking down at Lyra, he saw her tiny hand reach up toward his face, and for a moment, He felt the weight of an entire species' gratitude flowing through her touch. "Welcome to the fight," he whispered to her. "We're going to make sure your people never have to hide again." 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the Alliance station orbiting Kepler 442b, watching the construction of New Zephyr's first settlement. The floating city was smaller than the great metropolises of the original Zephyrine homeworld, but it was growing, powered by the same wind capture technology that Lyra's people had perfected centuries ago. In his arms, Lyra gurgled contentedly, her skin glowing with the soft luminescence that had become as familiar to Jake as his own heartbeat. She had grown remarkably in the past months, not just physically, but in the depth of understanding that seemed to shine from her eyes. The Zephyrian elders said she was developing faster than normal, as if the trauma of her birth had accelerated her connection to the genetic memories she carried. "She's beautiful," Zara said, joining him at the viewport. The Zephyrian woman had recovered fully from her ordeal, and with proper nutrition and medical care, she had regained the ethereal beauty that characterized her species. But more than that, she had found purpose in helping to establish the new colony. "She's getting heavy," Jake replied with a smile, though he made no move to put the baby down. In the months since rescuing Zara, he had become something between a guardian and an uncle to Lyra. The Alliance had offered him a position as a cultural liaison, helping other refugee species integrate into their protection programs. The other survivors arrive tomorrow, Zara said, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and nervousness. 3 males, including one of our historians. Between them and Lyra's inherited memories, we might be able to reconstruct enough of our culture to truly rebuild. Jake nodded, understanding the weight of that statement. The Zephyrians weren't just trying to survive as individuals. They were attempting to resurrect an entire civilization from the brink of extinction. It was a monumental task, but one that seemed possible with the Alliance's support. "Commander Vess wants to see us," Zara continued. "She says there's been a development in the Harvester situation." They made their way through the station's curved corridors, passing other refugee species that the Alliance had taken under their protection. Jake had learned that the Preservation Alliance was made up of dozens of races, all committed to protecting the diversity of life in the galaxy. It was a noble cause, but also a dangerous one. The Harvesters and organizations, like them, had significant resources and few scruples. In the command center, Vess was studying a holographic display showing shipping routes and fleet movements. Her expression was grave as she turned to greet them. "The Harvesters have escalated their operations," she said without preamble. "They've hired mercenary fleets and are targeting Alliance facilities directly. They seem particularly interested in recovering Lyra." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Why her specifically?" "Because she's unique," Vess explained. "Most Zephyrian children carry partial genetic memories, but Lyra received the complete cultural download from her mother during a traumatic birth. She's essentially a living library of her entire species' knowledge and history. To collectors, like the Harvesters, she's worth more than a dozen normal specimens." "What do you recommend?" Zara asked, though Jake could see the fear in her eyes. "We're moving the colony to a more secure location," Vess replied. "The sanctuary world's in the Andromeda Reach. It's a 3-month journey, but the area is heavily patrolled by Alliance forces." Jake looked down at Lyra, who was studying the holographic display with the intense focus that had become her trademark. Even at 6 months old, she seemed to understand more than any child should. "There's something else," Vess continued. "The Alliance Council has approved a new initiative. We're going to start actively hunting the Harvesters instead of just reacting to their attacks. We want you to be part of the strike team, Jake." "Me?" Jake was surprised. "I'm not a soldier." "No, but you understand what we're fighting for," Vess replied. You've seen what the harvesters do to families, to entire species. That perspective is valuable in a fight like this. Jake looked at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. She's right. You saved us not because you were trained to fight, but because you understood that some things are worth fighting for. Over the following days, Jake found himself torn between his desire to protect Lyra and his need to strike back at the forces that had nearly destroyed her people. The solution came from an unexpected source, Lyra herself. During one of their quiet moments together, Jake had placed his hand on her forehead, as he'd done many times before. But this time, instead of receiving memories, he felt something else, a sense of purpose, of determination that seemed to come from the accumulated wisdom of her people. She wants you to go, Zara said, having observed the exchange. The Zephyrians were never a warrior race, but we understood that sometimes violence is necessary to protect what is precious. Jake made his decision. He would join the Alliance. Strike force, but he would also ensure that Lyra and her people would be safe in the sanctuary worlds. It was a balancing act, but one that felt right. The night before his departure, Jake stood once again on the observation deck, holding Lyra as they watched the stars. The baby's skin glowed softly in the darkness, and Jake could feel the weight of her people's hopes and dreams flowing through her. I promise you, he whispered to her, I'll make sure you never have to hide again. Your people will be free to rebuild, to create new wonders, to sing their mathematical poetry to the stars. Lyra looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, and Jake felt her tiny hand grip his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, he understood that he wasn't just fighting for one species or one child. He was fighting for the right of all beings to exist freely, to preserve their cultures, and pass them on to future generations. As the transport ship prepared to take the Zephyrian survivors to their new home, Jake watched from the departure bay. Zara held Lyra at the viewport, and even from a distance, Jake could see the baby's luminescent farewell. Take care of each other, he said softly, knowing that his own journey was just beginning. The fight against the harvesters would be long and dangerous, but Jake had learned something important in the past months. Sometimes the most important battles are fought, not for glory or conquest, but for the simple right to exist, to love, and to hope for a better tomorrow. As the transport disappeared into hyperspace, carrying the last of the Zephyrians toward their new home, Jake felt a sense of completion mixed with anticipation. He had helped save a species from extinction. But more importantly, he had found his purpose in a galaxy that often seemed cold and indifferent. The stars stretched endlessly before him, filled with countless worlds and civilizations that might need protecting. Jake Morrison, former scavenger and debt runner, had become something he never expected, a guardian of hope itself. And somewhere, in the vast darkness, a baby girl glowed softly with the light of her people's dreams, carrying their future toward a new dawn.